The Bureau of Customs urges President Aquino to issue another executive order to settle the issue whether the importation of used cars is allowed in the country. Paula Palma has that story.
Bureau of Customs Commissioner Rufy Biazon seeks a new executive order from Malacanang, clarifying the government's stand on the ban on the importation of used vehicles. As of now, Biazon says the Bureau is in limbo, confused over which ruling to follow: the Supreme Court's decision affirming the ban or the existing palace order allowing used vehicles to enter the country. Last month, the Supreme Court has affirmed EO 156, which bans the importation of used vehicles. EO 156 was issued by President Gloria Arroyo in 2002. In 2005, Arroyo issued EO 418, which modifies the tariff rates for used imported vehicles.
Probably the President can issue another executive order to clarify those matters, setting the policy, no? Kung ano ba talaga ang magiging paninindigan ng ating pamahalaan pagdating sa pag-import ng used vehicles.
Car dealers cite EO 418 to justify the importation of second-hand vehicles. Because of the existing executive order, Biazon says the Bureau's hands are tied and cannot stop the importation of used cars. He adds the Bureau of Customs has yet to receive the certificate of finality of the Supreme Court order on EO 156. For now, Biazon says he can only block the release of the imported vehicles from Port Irene. He adds not all pre-owned imported vehicles are smuggled.
Ayon naman sa explanation ng ating port collector, may prosesong pinagdaanan itong mga sasakyang ito. As you can see, yung iba dyan mayroon ng plate number. No? Ibig sabihin, dumaan na siya sa proseso ng customs clearance and LTO registration.
Always tax paid, properly registered, properly documented before they go out from the free port.
At least 500 imported second-hand vehicles are in Port Irene. Biazon says he will submit a report to President Aquino next week to encourage him to issue a new order addressing the matter. Paula Palma, Solar News.
An Asian Institute of Management Studies says political dynasties have no place in a democracy because they limit access to political power and influence to a few. The study has two explanations about dynasties. Poor people continue to vote for political dynasties, and dynasties continue to frustrate poverty reduction efforts. We now have here in the studio Professor Ronald Mendoza of the AIM Policy Center to talk more about political dynasties and their relation to inequality. Good evening.
Good evening.
Professor. Very young professor. Thank you for being here. Okay, so this is dynasties and democracies, the political side of inequality. When did you start doing this, carrying out this study?
Well, I started actually shortly after I returned to the Philippines.
What year was that?
This was early 2011.
2011.
Yes.
Okay, so you were studying already this present 15th
Yes.
Congress.
Yes.
So what did you do? You went, you looked at the data in Congress, and then
Yeah.
you actually counted, no?
Yeah.
Ilan, well, in the lower house, in the House of Representatives, ilan, how many of them belong to political families?
Right, right. It was actually an army of volunteer researchers, as well as some economists at the AIM Policy Center. And we went one by one, and actually, if you're a dynasty, you get a check. If you're not a dynasty, you get a blank. And then we counted all the checks, and we came up with the number that 70% of our Congress is dynastic.
Okay, 70% of the 200, so give or take 200
Yeah.
plus.
These are the district-based congressmen.
Even, no, but you didn't count also the party list. Because minsan may party list, yun pala.
Yeah. The party list is a bit problematic, so we didn't include them in the original study. But we are starting a study just on the party list right now.
Because some of them, some of their representatives, their nominees, belong to political families, right? When you say dynasties, you mean political families, anybody who is related to anyone who has held a position.
Exactly.
In
exactly.
government. Okay, so 70% of the 200 or so.
Yeah.
And for you, that is a very big number.
It is. It's about double the number of dynasties in the Japanese Diet. It's 10 times the number of dynasties in the U.S. Congress. It's it compares to 40% dynasties in Mexico's Congress. So basically, we are topping the number of in terms of dynasties in Congress when compared to other democracies.
So you were able to look at the figures from other countries
Exactly. Yeah.
all around the world, all over
Right,
the world.
right.
Okay, so if you were to come out with a list, no, from let's say 1 to 20, saan tayo doon? Saan ang Pilipinas? Number 1 ba tayo? Hindi naman.
Yes, we are.
Oh, we are number 1.
At least our Congress is.
Okay.
And if we look at the local government indicators, of course, we took advantage of existing studies in other countries. This is the only reason why we can begin to compare our Congress. But if we look at our local governments, I think we will also be number 1. There will be a lot.
There will be much more, no?
Yes,
By,
yes, a lot
how many
more.
percent?
Well, according to our figures, it's actually in some provinces even higher than 70%, which means there's actually more political concentration in some parts of our country. So there's a lot lost in averages, as you know. But if you average out across all of the Congress, you get 70%. But if you look at a particular province, that there could actually be more.
Okay, so you're saying we are number 1 in the world when it comes to electing members of political dynasties, at least to Congress, meaning House of Representatives and the Senate?
No,
Ganun ba
just
yun?
the Philippine Congress.
Just, okay, House
Right.
of Representatives, the
Right.
lower house.
The other factoids are actually quite compelling as well. If you look at the younger congressmen, if you think that maybe this will change soon because new faces will be entering Congress, well, 80% of the younger congressmen are dynastic. So there are even more dynasties among the younger congressmen. And if you link the dynasty pattern with socioeconomic outcomes like poverty, average income, the dynasties are located where there's higher poverty,
Okay.
which is to us quite a troubling pattern. Without
Yeah.
even having any normative view of dynasties, it is a troubling pattern to see that there are more dynasties where there are more poor people.
Can you be very specific? Because here you say that you talk about the regions where there is higher incidence, poverty level incidence, no? But can you be very specific? Let's go by province. And
Well-
then sino yung dynasty na nandun?
Yeah.
At anong probinsya to?
Yeah, I'll only name a few, and this is public knowledge. In places like Maguindanao, for instance, there are well-known dynasties there. And Maguindanao actually tops the list of most concentrated political power as far as the dynastic measure is concerned.
Yeah, please name them.
Well, there's the Ampatuans in there, but there are also a lot of smaller dynasties. I can't name all of them off the top of my head. But we do have all the data basically showing this. What we try to do actually in terms of our indicator is to look at political concentration. So what we're seeing is there are those thin dynasties, basically magkakasunod. They follow each other.
Okay.
So if you're the grandfather, you get replaced by your son. If you're the son, you get replaced by your the grandson.
Yeah.
But
Or sometimes
basically-
bumabalik, ano?
Right,
You get
right.
replaced by your parent.
Exactly,
Para pag
but-
ganon, it either moves horizontally
just
or
vertically. The thin
Oo.
dynasties actually move in a very just vertical way. They
Okay.
follow each other.
Okay.
And in the past, there were many examples of these kinds of dynasties. Now, I think what troubles many is that this thin pattern is now beginning to expand like this.
Triangular na.
Exactly.
Oh, meaning?
And if you look at the local government infrastructure, from the governor on the top, the vice governor, to the mayors, the congressmen, to the provincial board members, some dynasties, some clans are actually placing relatives
All over.
all over that infrastructure.
Can you be specific?
Well, I mean, the Ampatuans are there, the Ecleos are there, the Fuas are there. the
Fuwa of?
I think this is Siquijor.
Sige.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's the Singsons, actually, in the north. So it's not just all in the south.
In the Visayas, wala?
There are also a number there. There's, but not off the top of my head. I can't
Okay.
memorize all of them.
Yeah.
But essentially, the pattern itself is troubling also for another reason. It is that the checks and balances in government weaken when you have different positions basically occupied by the same family. And so that's another reason why, not just that there's more poverty where there's more dynasties, but
Yeah.
that the checks and balances can actually
Yeah.
begin to weaken.
Well, two questions here, no? First, that they are voted into office.
Yes.
You have their constituents who keep voting for them, kasi anak ni ganito ganyan, ano?
Right.
Ganon
Right.
mag-isip ang tao,
Right.
anak din, okay naman to.
Nasubukan na,
Oo,
pangalan na.
subok na, parang
Oo.
ganon, ano? At pangalawa, there are some also who sometimes do well,
Right.
di ba?
But what's your comparator? Right? This is the question. And in fact, there's a famous dynastic politician who said, well, why don't we just let the people decide? He, of course, said this in Tagalog, but, you know,
Who was that? Who was that famous?
well, this is our former president, Erap Estrada. He says, it's very hard to argue against this, right? But if you think about it, if the dynasties are monopolizing the political structure, then the next question to that is, well, what choices are you offering to the people? If we let them decide, but there are not many options, not many choices, then it's not much of a choice.
Okay. So how do we resolve that situation then?
It's-
How do you encourage new blood, no? Hindi yung trapo tsaka yung bimpo niya. Yung
Well-
bimpo, batang inihain ng magulang sa politika.
Oh, wow. That's the first
Hindi,
acronym.
kasi bimpo, fresh pa yan, malinis, ano?
Yeah, yeah.
Yung trapo, marumi. Anyway. Well, so how do you come out with the new blood?
Well, the main thing is, and there's a lot of analysis on this, that dynasties are actually a symptom of our failing political system, of our parties, political parties that are not really producing the types of outcomes that will sustain reforms, or even just pick leaders based on reforms, not based on their names, their winnability, or the fact that more people know them. So the reason is that the parties are not really producing those options. So if you look to the deeper roots, the challenge then is to look at our parties and see whether they're doing the job right.
Okay, so how do we strengthen the political parties now so that they don't have to keep fielding those who have names with recall? Kasi yun palagi, di ba? Yun ang inisip nila eh.
Yeah.
Eh, malakas to eh.
Right.
Mananalo to eh. Ganun.
Whereas someone who's good but has no name recall will not even be considered. Well, that's a difficult question. It takes time to build strong political parties, but certainly we can shed light on those parties that are actually malfunctioning in a very obvious way. If you look at parties where dynasties are dominating them, parties that are not nurturing young leaders or nurturing options, parties that are not financed by their members, and essentially they're beholden to particular personalities, which is many of our parties. Those are the things we should immediately try to correct, because even if you replace a dynasty, if that's the system that will produce the next option may not be any better than the one that you replaced. Or you produce a new face, but essentially the first thing they try to do is make their own dynasty. So I think the deeper root of the problem is the malfunctioning political party system in the Philippines, and that requires a lot of work. I think there's a bill now that is being considered in Congress, which is supposed to build more strength, more accountability in the political parties. And unfortunately, it's not as sexy and interesting a topic as many other things, certainly when compared to political dynasties. But that's really the root thing that we should focus our attention on.
Okay. By doing this study, what you're trying to do is, of course, parang shine the light on this very, very big issue. But do you think people will listen, voters will listen? Because if you look, for example, at the Senate race, no, the names that are coming out sa survey are yung mga matutunog, di ba?
Yes.
Yun yung mga kilala,
Yes.
Ejercito, Enrile,
Yes.
yung mga ganon,
Yes.
di ba?
Well, the challenge is twofold. One is, if we don't start this now, there's not going to be enough consciousness to basically build the momentum and keep on pushing. And right now, the reality is all the options, or most of the options, are actually dynasties. So if you're practical about it, you can't expect a major change immediately. However, at the local government level, there's a lot of other leaders that are already in play. And that's where, if the people are listening, if the people are now realizing that dynasties have been in power, but they haven't really made a major difference in many parts of our country, then really the power is in their hands. Will they sell their votes and actually have these people basically lord over them for a longer period of time? Or will they have a longer term sort of view and say, no, I will not sell my vote, I will actually invest in a new person, with a better chance of actually performing for that particular region. So that message, people need to believe in that. That's the challenge for the new leaders. If you cannot offer anything that is any different from what the other has offered, then you're always going to fail. You're always going to have a tough time sort of replacing the incumbent.